Good evening, everybody. What I won't be doing tonight is just simply retelling the story of the Angels of Mons. A lot of you that are familiar with the story will already have that prior knowledge. I'm going to tell it in a different way. And what I'm also going to be doing is introducing three completely brand new pieces of evidence, which has only come to light over the last couple of years. There will be a little bit of history with this as well, because without the history of 1914 Europe, I don't think the Angels of Mons story makes much sense. What I've also done is, well, following Claire Davies' excellent webinar on cemeteries, I've also included a little bit of trivia information on the work of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which hopefully that'll be interest to everybody. So with a bit of luck, should be something there for everybody. So we'll get straight into this one because I ran badly over time last time, and so I want to make sure I can stick to the allocated time that's given to me. So if you've got no knowledge of the Angels of Mons story, it's generally a legend about the appearance of a variety of supernatural entities that supposedly protected the British Army from defeat by the invading forces of German Empire on the 23rd of August 1914, which became known as the main Battle of Mons. That's the first major land battle of the First World War. Once the story started to come into the press, a lot suggest that it was due to the short story, which is really a ghost story, of Carla Bowman, which was released by Arthur Machen in the end of September 1914. The book itself that followed, Carla Bowman, didn't actually get published till the following year in 1915. And the more that I looked at this story, the more I began to find serious contradictions with dates and events that really don't go anywhere near to try and explain really what actually happened on the 23rd of August 1914. It was also subject to an SPR investigation in 1915. I'll also be introducing a new theory tonight as well, the reason why the British government changed direction, where they were quite happy to run the Angels of Mons story, and then did a complete 180 in the start of 1915. It's not like a government, is it, to change their mind when they tell you one thing, then go do another one. Mons itself, the city of Mons, is quite a vibrant, busy, cosmopolitan city now, but it's had its fair share of trauma with various conflicts over the centuries. It's right on the border between France and Belgium. Germany's on the right-hand side. And this is going to be the scene of the first major land battle of what then became known as the First World War. With a bit of luck, Yinsky she's got a 2-page document which she's going to put onto the general chat for you. I did this as well on the John Meek webinar, where you don't need to write anything down. I will do multiple links there that will give you the various links to other reading material, as well as some downloads, which will be available as well on that document. So hopefully Yinsky will pop that into general chat. It's only a 2-page document, but the links are on there. Those are interested in taking the story further. The top left book is The Bowman by Arthur Machen. Arthur Machen himself is quite an interesting author. He often wrote about historical legends, really. King Arthur, the Agincourt of the 100-Year War, and The Bowman was another book. That's the one that many people point towards as being the reason for the legends of the Angels of Mons. The top right book, which is David Clarke's Angel of Mons, is probably a more thorough explanation and does provide both sides of the story, which is something I'm going to try and attempt tonight, to give you both the pros and the anti Angel of Mons. The bottom 2 books, Angels in the Trenches and Myths and Legends of First World War, both cover that, the general story of the Angels of Mons. The centre book, which is on the side of the right angel, the title is a giveaway, written by Harold Begbie in 1915. He released that as a sort of an answer to the Bowman story of Machen had released. That book in the centre is no longer available. It was on a one-eight print really in 1915, but it is free available, out of copyright. But I've saved you the trouble. There's a download link to that book on the document from the actual general chat itself. So we're now going to go into a little bit about the initial history of 1914 Europe, particularly if we look into a modern day context with what's occurring in Ukraine. It was very much a monarchy base in 1914. Russia had its Tsar, Austria-Hungary had its emperor, Germany had its Kaiser, France was very much a republic, and the UK, Britain, it was King George V that was on the throne. The three key areas initially with the story of Mons is Sarajevo, which is the capital of modern day Bosnia. Bosnia, I'll just call it Bosnia. I can never pronounce it, Herzegovina. I got it right second time. And Serbia also plays a role within the Mons story. Britain has continued looked over its shoulder towards Imperial Germany. Britain at that point had reached really the pinnacle of their vast empire. They ruled over about a sixth of the planet and coined the phrase, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Germany, on the other hand, was continued to expand. It already taken control of vast countries of the Balkans, Croatia, and other areas. Bosnia was another area that they took control over. So there was already suspicion around before the outbreak of the First World War, and I think all the ingredients were there anyway for something to happen. Just needed an excuse for it to occur. So, as far as 1914 is concerned, as far as the Balkans concerned, they were always deeply distrusting of what was becoming the huge German Empire. The emperor at the time, Franz Joseph, he's not in the best of health. He's approaching 84 years of age, not expected to live much longer. And the world's expecting Franz Ferdinand will soon inherit the empire and its 52 million subjects. He was already head of the Imperial Army. By the start of 1914, Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is Sarajevo, which is the capital there, because of this sheer amount of upset and conflict that was occurring there, Austria decided that they were going to suspend the parliament. All their laws were annulled. Serbian national parties were banned from the area, and troops have been called in to quell any unrest. In late 1914, following his visit to Britain, Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie strangely agreed to pay a visit to Bosnia. It was a strange decision considering the simmering powder keg that was occurring around the Balkan area. In a way, this is only an example. It's certainly not a comparison, because I don't think there's a comparison to it. But it's almost as if Vladimir Putin tomorrow decided to go on an open top coach to Kiev in Ukraine and do a diplomatic visit. We can probably predict it wouldn't end well. So Ferdinand deciding to go to Bosnia was a strange decision, but he decided to go all the same. If we look at the British forces in 1914 in isolation, Britain had continued to strengthen its military despite the Boer War ending in 1902. And by 1914, the start of 1914, and before the outbreak of the First World War, Britain had at its disposal around 247,000 of its First Army, 246,000 of its Second Army, around 280 to 300,000 in its reserves. Add that to its huge Royal Naval fleet, we're talking about 1 million military personnel available to them. Just 4 years later, Britain remained at its maximum strength of just over 3,820,000 soldiers, a vast recruitment exercise during the war. By the end of 1918 and the end of the conflict, the First World War, this is just British casualties with 673,375. The numbers are that disturbing. 1,600,000 wounded. Add the Commonwealth countries into that, you're talking 900,000 dead, 2.5 million wounded, and that doesn't include the German losses or the American losses. Now, this number of 673,000 to this, even today, remains an estimate. It seems a strange thing to say, considering it was 104 years since the conflict come to an end, but that number continues to grow for reasons we'll come into in a moment. So at the end of the conflict, there's obviously a massive rush then to demobilise. So by the end of 1920, the British Army was down to 370,000. One of them was my grandfather from my mother's side. I had 8 ancestors, and I'm quite sure many of you on the webinar tonight will have had ancestors that were involved in the First World War as well as the Second World War. I had 8 of them. Only my grandfather and another ancestor, David Clark, returned. The other 6 all perished, and only me great uncle, Lance Corporal Frank Hayes from the North Staffordshire Regiment, has a marked grave. The other 5 missing, never to be seen again, don't know where they are. And of course, in 1920, in less than 20 years' time, they would have to go and do it all over again. So a little bit of information. Again, I've included this mainly out of the sheer amount of interest it's shown on Claire Davies' excellent webinar. Is the picture on the right is David Clark when he's 18, when he first joined the Manchester Regiment in 1916. I know David Clark perished due to an injury sustained in the First World War. He took a gunshot wound to the back, severing his spine, and he came back paralysed from the neck down. That's his grave to the left. He's buried in Sutton Cemetery in Stockport. Yeah, when I looked at his war records as well as his death certificate, it clearly states there on his discharge document, he took a gunshot wound to the spine. On his death certificate, because he only lasted a couple of months. He was transferred to Broughton House in Stockport, one of the many hospitals that have been set up to really cope with the high levels of serious injuries that the soldiers are returning from. So you would have hospitals specialises in facial reconstruction, missing limbs, and in David Clark's case, a spinal injury. But he did definitely die from it, as his death certificate clearly shows. Gunshot wound to back 10 months previously. Yet he was never in the casualty list. He was never part of that number. So during COVID, we all got many things that we wanted to catch up with, and David Clark was one of them. I decided to put a case together, sent to the Ministry of Defence to have him allocated as a war casualty. And I got official notification last December that that was now the case. Fifth column, 5th name down, Private David Clark, Manchester Regiment, post-discharge due to gunshot wound to spine, sustained in action. So now, after 104 years, he's now become a war casualty.
Tuberculosis.
Pardon? Did somebody say something? That's okay, right. What I've also done is, well, I've included the second from the bottom, which is Private Thomas Clinton. He died by judicial execution in 1917, yet was never considered to be a war casualty. He is. But the shock for me came was when I actually looked at the list, the additional names that were given in just 2021 alone, plus 653 names that were not allocated as war casualties before. A lot of this is due to ancestry. We've all been researching our ancestors, and people have wondered why they're not been listed as a war casualty. So I thought I'd just share that bit of information for you. If you've got somebody that fits in that category, get in contact with me and I'll talk you through the process. This is a little bit of information down the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Again, I've included this. I know it's nothing to do with the Angels of Mons and sitting on Paranormal, but I generally felt this may be of interest to you. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission itself, set up in 1923, is totally funded by 6 Commonwealth countries, which is Britain, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and India. They have a budget of around about £70 million per year, and they look after the graves and commemorations of 1,700,000 casualties from the First and the Second World War. That's just them 2 wars. The numbers are deeply disturbing. As far as the Britain's concerned, there'll be a cemetery close to you, which will have a casualty in there. There are over 304,000 casualties in over 1,300 locations, just in UK and Ireland alone. Britain is the second mass in numbers wise. It's only second to France, where it's got the biggest number of Commonwealth war graves. The graves during the First and Second World War, the decision was made very early not to repatriate any of the casualties. In reality, that wasn't the case. In between August of 1914 and March, April of 1915, there was some repatriations, but they were very selective. And they tended to be those involved with the aristocracy. An ex-prime minister's grandson, for example, was one that was repatriated. Clearly, there's a massive outcry. Everyone needs to be treated exactly the same. So after April 1915, there were no repatriations took place. You basically buried you where you were killed. As far as those that are in the UK, these are normally casualties that have died through sickness, injuries returning from war, accidents, that type of thing. Now, the commission itself, they will inspect, clean and tidy up a grave every 2 to 6 years, what they call the scattered graves. These are just casual graves, cemeteries where you've only got a couple of people in there. In the bottom left one, which is Walter Keane, he's buried in a village next to me called Antrobus. You read it right, A16. He wasn't involved with the conflict. He was in the depot with the Cheshire Regiment in Chester, when unfortunately he got injured and died because of it. Now, when he was buried, his father, also Walter Keane, was already in the grave. So Walter was buried with his father. And this standardised war grave that we often see didn't come into being until around about 1923. So Walter was clearly buried with his father. And what's happened then, they've had some sort of inscription placed on the grave, but it wasn't sufficiently good enough for the Commonwealth war graves, because what they are looking to have on display at all times is, one, the name, the regiment that were involved, together with a number. As long as it's got that, they'll leave it well alone. Once a grave comes into poor condition, either through just wear and tear or it gets broken through accident, the commission will come along and replace with the stone. Both stones are made of the same material, which is Portland stone, but they can be made of slate, granite, as well as marble. The one to the right, it looks bright white, which is what Walter Keane's would look like once it's dried. This particular stone, this Portland stone, I find it quite porous, soaks up moisture and can look quite dark. When it's dry, it's in really, really good condition and bright white. So if you see them in your local cemetery, get the number, the name, go on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission website. There is a link in the document, and you can find out a little bit of information about him. All families were given the options to have an inscription below the cross, which in Walter Keane's case was, if I remember right, thy will be done. So that's something that a mother decided, but you can have any inscription that you want. On those that perish after the Second World War, so it's Second World War, they're looked after by the Ministry of Defence, because it's a Britain-only conflict. First and Second World War, Commonwealth War Graves Commission look after them. Post Second World War, it's the MOD, but in reality, they actually pay money to the Commonwealth War Graves to look after them. So in the case of this grave to the right, this is Neil Williams. He died on the 6th of December 1982 when he went to the Dropping Well Public House in Ballakelly, Northern Ireland, and the Irish Republic of Ireland Army let off a bomb, killing 11 soldiers, 8 from the Cheshire Regiment, together with 6 civilians. In all cases, all of them were repatriated back to the UK, and that happened with all conflicts after the Second World War. With the Falklands, it was slightly different at first, because the 247 that were buried in Port St. Carlos, the with the families wanted them returning. So with the exception of 14 casualties, all the others were exhumed and returned back to UK for burial. So I thought I'll just cover that a bit of information, what the Commonwealth War Graves do. If you've got a loved one that's it killed in either of those two conflicts, or a later one for that matter, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission do look after these meticulously. And now I'm with my cousin, who's an ex-Cheshire regiment soldier himself. We're one of two of 15,000 that get out, and we've been able to bring the inspections down to about 6 months to 12 months. So they do look after, even though many of these, such as Walter Keane, is probably going no longer any living descendants left anymore. Back to the First World War again. If you generally ask people what caused the outbreak of the First World War, they will often, the most common answer is that they don't know, which is hardly surprising. The conflict happened 108 years ago. Those that have got a little bit of the history correct will often point out the assassination of both Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, together with the Sophie as well, who is still a loss of life. This is the picture that was taken on the day, literally minutes before the assassination took place. There were quite a number of pictures taken that day because it was a big event. The potential new emperor of the massive Austrian Empire was coming to Bosnia, so there's going to be pictures taken. All those pictures that show the front of the vehicle will always show that same registration number, A111118. I'll come back to this picture in a short while. So we're now on the 23rd of June, 1914. And for reasons I've already said, the reason why they decided to go to Bosnia was a strange decision, but he went all the same. They also put the Austrian army off limits for the day, which again was a strange decision why they would want to do that. They could have provided at least some sort of protection. There were two assassination attempts on the day. The first one failed when the terrorists simply launched a number of
so I would do factory
hello?
work, I would do delivery, and I
think
would
we've got
do all kinds of, it's not easy. But finish my graduate work was normally within six years or so. It took me 10 years.
Someone got a microphone on there. That's it, gone away now. Okay. So the terrorists threw a normal number of homemade explosives. Neither of them went off, so the terrorists just legged it, including the guy by the name of Gavrilo Princip. The driver then made a fateful decision. The correct and safest decision would have been to shut the car engine off, get out the car, go back into the embassy, literally feet away, and back to safety. But he decided otherwise. He put his foot to the floor and off he went. And the problem now, he's got no escort, doesn't know the area, took a number of wrong turnings and got himself badly lost. He then made another fateful decision, stopped the car to turn around, literally feet away from one of the terrorists by the name of Gavrilo Princip, who was saying later interviews, couldn't believe his luck, thought fate had intervened, and he just simply stepped into the road, fired multiple shots into the car, killing the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, his wife Sophie, together with the driver. Colorized picture of Princip on the left. And of course, it was the mainstay news of the day. The media, as often happens in these cases, don't do the cause any favors, because Serbia, although Princip was Serbian, he was in Bosnia when the assassination took place. The Serbia bent over backwards, and they certainly condemned the assassination, distanced themselves far away from it. But it didn't matter, because literally just weeks later, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, and Europe then obviously goes into the chaos followed by the First World War. The total number of military and civilian casualties in First World War is deeply, deeply disturbing. Around 20 million deaths in total, 20 million wounded, 10 million of them are military, 10 million were civilians. Princip found guilty, was initially given a death sentence, but there still is doubts over his actual age. It's that they all felt that he's certainly underage when he committed the crime that he did. So he was commuted to life imprisonment, but it didn't matter anyway, because less than 4 years later, he was to die.
Yeah.
He was to die anyway in 1918. Okay, back to the car and the first strange coincidence. It wasn't until 1918 when this is the vehicle that the Archduke was in when he got assassinated. That's been on permanent display ever since in an Austrian museum. And it didn't take historians very long to realise the significance of the registration number, A111118, which happened to could be translated as A, meaning Armistice, the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. So it seems ironic that the car that the Archduke was in when he got assassinated, which triggered the First World War, happened to be carrying the registration number that was exactly the same date of the end of the First World War, which wasn't going to occur till 4 years later. That found utterly bizarre. Back to the map. So what we've got now is the assassination takes place in Sarajevo in Bosnia. Austria-Hungary immediately blamed Serbia, declare war on Serbia. Russia is tied into treaty by Serbia and therefore mobilizes. Germany is tied to treaty with Austria-Hungary by treaty, declares war on Russia. France is tied to Russia by treaty, declares war on Germany. And you can see where this one's going. This leaves Britain now in a right precarious situation. It's got 3 issues to deal with. One is the fact that didn't have a treaty with France, mainly because France had already got a treaty with Russia. UK has never had a good relationship with Russia ever. So they were certainly not going to any secret treaty with France when that was a part of the Russia. But what it is concerned about is it has got an offer of assistance, but that's all. Likewise with Belgium. Belgium, if you're not aware of it, is really not a nation. Belgium is an idea that came about following the Napoleonic Wars, when we can blame Britain for that, decided it was a brilliant idea to carve land off Netherlands as well as France, make up Belgium, in a way forming a buffer zone between the two countries. They also had a sort of an offer of assistance to Belgium, but nothing tied in by treaty. But the main reason for Britain entering into the war was the plain fact Belgium had a token army, France's army was in total disarray, wasn't effective. And a joint Germany-Austrian army going into France 4 to 6 weeks later, they would get into the northern areas of France, into the ports, towards the English Channel, completely isolating Britain away from Northern Europe. And that was the main reason that Britain entered the war. I've got to cover the Netherlands, otherwise Ian Skill will not forgive me. The Netherlands is almost like piggy in the middle here, and it has to make a decision. And its decision, in hindsight, was absolutely the right one, is to go neutrality. Once that was done in 1914, that would mean Germany couldn't enter, and likewise, UK couldn't use any sort of land base. And Netherlands come away from the First World War relatively unscathed, but it was absolutely the right thing for them to do. So Britain now declares war on Germany on the 4th of August, mainly because of that reason. And they generally know when years after, when they started to look into the reasons what caused the conflict, it was generally accepted that Serbia was only the small fish. The big fish was always going to be France anyway. So the decision to enter the war from Britain's perspective was certainly the right thing to do at that time. So on the 12th of August, General John French, commander of the British forces, just lands in Boulogne. By August the 23rd, which is where the Mons story takes off, the British had around about 75,000 men and around 300 guns, but there were small artillery pieces, but waiting for them with 150,000 men and 600 guns, big artillery pieces of the German First Army. And the problem for Britain was that the aggressor always had time on his side. So as far as the Germans' perspective, they were able to pick the terrain carefully and left Britain really in total flatlined, over covering a 20-mile length of canal in a highly exposed position. By 1 a.m. on the 24th, just 15 hours later, Sir John French gave the order for general retreat. British losses about 1,600, German losses around about 15,000. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the German forces had in fact been slowed down, stopped, and then, as they did again, 4 years of what became the First World War, trench warfare, was then to begin. So they actually did the job, and this is where the Angel of the Mons story begins to take off. Now, the first British casualty of the First World War didn't occur at Mons. It happened 2 days earlier on the 21st. And the reason why I wanted just to cover this briefly is that is another extraordinary coincidence. It's not commonly spoken about, which I thought I'd share with you tonight. So on the 21st, 2 days before, as the British approaching Mons, they're sending out in night patrols, advanced scouting patrols, really. Unfortunately for John Parr's scouting patrol, they came across a German cavalry patrol. Brief firefight takes place, and John Parr became the first casualty, British casualty of the First World War. And he's buried in Saint Symphorien Military Cemetery, which is in Mons, but the exact location wasn't known until around about 1920 for reasons I'll go to in a second. Now, in France and Belgium, any of you who have been to Northern Europe, it seems to be every couple of minutes you're driving down the road, you see the green sign, War Cemetery, War Cemetery. There are around about 2,000 dedicated war cemeteries of different sizes, some of just a few hundred. The largest one, Tynecott's got 12,000, but there's 2,000 of them. The actual Western Front, the stretch from the English Channel all the way through to the Swiss Alps, stretching some 475 miles. The red line is the German line, the blue line is the Allied line. So if I were to go to Google Maps and put a number of the cemetery addresses in, you just see a massive blob of locations. There are literally that many of them. So in 1920, 2 years after the First World War ended, what Britain wants to find out is who was the last casualty, British casualty. They already knew who the first one was. All they need to do is just find out where he was. Then finally, looking through the diaries, the various war reports, it was confirmed that the last British soldier to be killed was George Allison of the 5th Royal Irish Lancers. And he was killed by a German sniper around about 90 minutes before the Armistice came into being. So in 1920, they needed to find out where them two were buried. So that would coincide with the burial of the unknown warrior in 1920. This was 2 years after the war had ended. Accepted by nothing more than extraordinary coincidence that they weren't actually buried only in the same cemetery, but literally feet away from each other. John Parr was killed on the 23rd of August, 1914. He's buried there. And George Allison was killed on the 11th of November, 1918, was buried literally 10 or 15 feet. And if you know the area and how many cemeteries around there, the likelihood of both being so menacingly close is quite extraordinary. And I don't know if Christopher Larson's on with us tonight, but I thought I'd just cover the Canadian. The last Commonwealth soldier to die in the First World War was Private George Price. I took this picture myself. This was taken in the Mons Museum because they had to change the stone because they actually got his name wrong, the initial wrong. It's got J and it should have been G for George. He was killed 2 minutes to Armistice. And the last known ally to be killed in the First World War was Sergeant Henry Gunther of the United States, was killed just 1 minute before the Armistice. Another pointless, wasted life. As far as dealing with the dead, British and Commonwealth, they've got to somehow trying to reconcile 900,000 that are dead. and missing. 2.5 million seriously wounded, some with life-changing injuries that wouldn't recover. And the other problem is many parents are on the webinar tonight. Some of you may have had children that have served in the service. I've no idea. But if you're a parent or a wife and you're told that your loved one been killed in a war, he's buried in France, he's looked after, it offers some degree of recovery. To be told that your loved one, they don't know where on earth they are, he's gone missing, presumed killed, is on a completely different level. So what you have in France and Belgium is, in all cemeteries, is this type of gravestone, a soldier of the Great War. They don't even know which regiment he's from, never mind his name. So what you then begin to see is huge monuments to the missing. The top one in the right-hand side is the Menin Gate. This is on the outskirts of the town of Ypres in Belgium. With inside the walls and corridors, the names of over 50,000 missing. It's a monument to the missing. It's become tradition since 1928 when this was built, that every night the road gets closed off at 7 o'clock. 3 firemen arrive, buglers, and they play the last post. And I've done every night, 365 days of the year since 1928. The only time when they've not been able to do it is during the Second World War, when they were occupied by the Germany. Apart from that, they've done it every night. Quite an emotional place to go to. If you're ever in Belgium, particularly in the town of Ypres, go to the Menin Gate. It's on there every night, and they have special events occurring there as well. As far as France is concerned, the mighty Sepval Memorial, again, simply built to the missing, over 55,000 names on there. That also has a Commonwealth War grave cemetery around it. And it's trying to deal with the missing, which is one of the most uncomfortable aspects, I think, of this awful war. So I just want to quickly touch on this before we do finally move on to the Angels of Mons, because what I want you to do tonight is talk you through a little bit of the history and take you on an emotional journey. So you're in the right frame of mind, is then when we look then is what happened on the 23rd of August. So I know it's not paranormal, but hopefully you'll understand the reasons why I've done it this way. So I live in a small village called Wincham, which is about 20 miles away from Chester. In 1920, the country is trying to find its way after the catastrophic deaths of the First World War. So what you then begin to see is towns, villages, trying to leave some form of remembrance. So in Britain alone, there's over 150,000 war memorials. Some are just small plaques in churches, other larger complexes, such as this memorial here. Because we've only about 300 where I live here, and so it's been a small hamlet really. The sister village is called Marston, which has got the cemetery, and it did have a church. We've never had a church, although the church was knocked down in the 1950s, but the cemetery is still in place. That's where our war memorial is. So what I wanted to do when this was coming up to 100 years old in 2020 was try and give these 27 names, 12 of them are Cheshire Regiment boys, back a life in digital format, because all we're doing is looking at names on stones. It's just a name, it's not meaning. So with tremendous help from Yinska, it took within 6 months, we'd actually had a full-blown website up and running, have one page dedicated for every soldier. There is a link on the document in the general chat. And slowly but surely, we worked our way through it. And it was quite an emotional choker, as Yinska will probably agree. You know, we were sharing information back and forth across the internet as we began to build the lives up of these young men. And one that I came across was, we've got many mothers on tonight, of a mother that received a letter, well, it would have been a telegram, about a son, James Spencer. And what she'd been told is the son went missing on the 25th of March in 1918. Don't know where he is. but his parents clearly are not having this, and took out a number of national and local advertisements asking for his whereabouts. And James Spence, in a way, is just one story of over 300,000 of those that remain missing to this day. And then we come, the last one now is about the unknown warrior. Even the BBC get this one wrong. They often refer to it as the unknown soldier, and it's not. And it was around about 1919 when King George V arrived at Tynecott and was quite taken back about the number of temporary markers, just wooden crosses really, with soldiers' names on them. The standardised Commonwealth war grave didn't actually become more common until after 1923. And it was a priest that mentioned to him that about the sheer number of missing soldiers. So he then evolved what we would become the unknown warrior. Now the Queen, or the head of state, every year since 1920, lays 2 wreaths. One goes on the main cenotaph in London, which commemorates all men and women died in all conflicts. And then she lays one other onto the tomb of the unknown warrior. So the idea behind this was to choose at random 4 remains of 4 unknown warriors. They simply didn't know if he was an airman, he was a sailor, or he was a soldier. They had no idea, and they still don't know, having any idea. Those 4 identical coffins were placed into a French chapel, where it was Brigadier General Wyatt. He chose one by walking into the chapel, placing a black glove on top of the coffin, and then the 3 remaining coffins are then removed for burial, and they never let that single coffin out of sight. And escort to Calais and onto a battleship back to Britain, where he was met by no other than King George himself. He then escorted the warrior to Westminster Abbey, and the unknown warrior is buried alongside kings and queens, and he's someone's ancestor. He may be one of mine, he may be one of yours. And I think it was a typically British way of dealing with a significant problem, where it leaves that element of doubt. Those that have lost loved ones and they simply have no idea where they are, they may just be in Westminster Abbey, and we don't know. And the final one comes to Tynecott. Tynecott is the largest Commonwealth war grave cemetery in the world. Close to 12,000 are buried in there, 8,300 unknown, they don't know who they are. This picture was taken in the bottom left in around 1919. Right in the centre of Tynecott is this monstrosity, which is a German reinforced bunker. There are actually 3 of them, 2 at the entrance and 1 directly in the centre. This thing cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of lives. It's the Australians that took it in the end, and they were already burying because you got buried where you got killed. So when King George visited, he's obviously taken back by the sheer numbers of, you can see the mayor just goes on forever, of dead. What they're going to do with this monstrosity, this German bunker. I don't think you'd break that up with a nuclear weapon, to be honest. It's something like 3 meters thick, reinforced concrete. And it was he that came up with a brilliant suggestion. Every Commonwealth, dedicated Commonwealth War Grave Commission cemetery has what this cross called the Cross of Sacrifice. And he come up with a brilliant idea of, rather than smashing the bunker down, bury the Cross of Sacrifice directly on top of it, which is exactly what they did, which you can see here. And what they also did is cut out a circle area to the front of it, where you can actually see the bunker underneath. So the oppressive bunker itself had this full dignity, with the Cross of Sacrifice being built directly on top of it. Fantastic way. I thought I'd just share that one. It's one that's not commonly known, but I just find that sort of stuff quite fascinating, how we deal with certain issues. So we're now into the main crux of the story. So on the 23rd of March, coming to the end of the day, the German advance is stalled and is stopped. And almost immediately, the supernatural stories start to emerge. So the next few days, people started to report seeing mysterious visions. One young officer told Mabel Collins, the author of The Crucible, the media are after stories, still are to this day. I had the most amazing hallucinations marching at night, as if I was fast asleep, I think. Everyone was reading about the road and seeing things. I saw all sorts of things, enormous men walking towards me, and lights and chairs and things in the road. Then on the 5th of September 1914, a couple of weeks after the Mons, Brigadier General John Charteris, who was Chief Intelligence Officer, reported that on one particular vision that was spreading through the Second Corps of how the angel of the Lord on the traditional white horse and clad all in white and flaming sword faced the advancing Germans at Mons and forbade their further progress. What I've got for you now, and hopefully I managed to turn the audio on, is a quick 5-minute movie. We were quite fortunate in 2017. I was in Mons with my cousin, laying a wreath on the Cheshire Regiment monument that's there, the Cheshire Regiment were there in Mons. And on the way back, we thought we'd visit the Mons Memorial Museum. It just recently opened. And they dedicate a full floor to the Angels of Mons story. And they also have a small cinema. And we looked at it, we had a thought, go in and have a look at this. And it's about 13, 14 minutes long. And we're quite impressed with it. So what we then did, go into the gift shop, and we wanted to ask a question. Where could we get a copy? Was it on DVD? And the answer was definitely not. But once we found out what we were doing there, they introduced us to the museum curator, and he allowed us to go into the cinema and film on a mobile phone at the back of the cinema. So I can assure you it's not a bootleg. I wouldn't do that on you. You know, we generally would give him permission. But I have shaved I've just left the last 5 minutes on there. The rest of you've already got the backstory, so there's no point of just recycling that again. So as a visual aid, it's very good. I think it will begin to, if you've got no knowledge on the Angels of Mons story, what these soldiers were saying they were seeing. Now, when we actually filmed this for the second time, it was my cousin. I don't know what language he pressed. It could be Swahili for all I know. I have absolutely no idea. So if you know what language is being spoken, please let me know, because I can't understand a word what's being said. I'm pretty sure it's not French anyway. But it's got the sound effects in it, and a visual aid. It's very, very good. You're going to pick up the story from where the British soldiers are now really landlocked into the shallows. Now, what they're waiting for is the artillery to stop. The British can't move backwards or forwards or get out of the shallows. Now, one of the reasons what people don't understand, and I think if I give you a bit of the military side of this, you'll have a better understanding when it is that you look at the Mons story, why they were saying this occurred, is once they reached Mons and the Germans then made their first attack, they've got 600 pieces of artillery, and some are big pieces of artillery. And the job of artillery is to drop shells on top of you to destroy you, at the same time to stop reinforcements coming up at the rear and drop shells behind you. So you can't get out of the trench and go backwards, you just be obliterated. You also can't get out of the trench and go forwards, because the machine guns that the Germans are waiting for you will just turn you into a human colander. You can't get out of the shell hole, because one of the things that a shell hole does, it barricades your way from debris. 95% of soldiers get killed with artillery shells due to flying debris, not by the explosion itself. And the reason why soldiers like shell holes is that it's practically impossible to drop a shell directly where the previous one went to, because as they fire a big artillery piece off, it might recoil 12, 16 foot backwards. It then recoils back forwards, banging around. It's on loose surface. They load another shell into it. All shells have different amounts of gunpowder in them. So even if they find it identical sighting again, it's not going to land in exactly the same shell hole. So that's where the British were. And what they're waiting for now is for the artillery to stop. Once that stops, they're going to come out of them shell holes and meet the German infantry as well as the cavalry. And it's at this point now that where you're going to pick up the story. So hopefully you're going to hear this without a problem. Bear in mind, it was filmed on a mobile phone. Can you hear that okay?
Yes, we can.
Joe, did you see that? Peter said briskly, I see, yes, I see. Such a density is frightening. It's surprising as well. All you have to do is fire into the crowd. Let them get closer, and then it's the minute of mayhem. A deluge of bullets descends on them. A surprise blow. The machine gun next to me fires to the max. We're almost afraid of our eagerness to kill. Shortly after, the 75mm battery sent a rain of shells down upon us. Our artillery responds, but the shrapnel does a lot of damage. The soldiers are not sufficiently protected from metal shards flying in every direction. The German infantry is advancing in droves towards the front and is slowly gaining ground, despite the casualties we inflict. Anthony and Peter cried out. And there was nothing. Horrible buzzing in my head. And a shrill whistle too. I'm covered with dirt. First I think I'm dead. Hot liquid runs down my face. I cut to the head. Nothing serious. Next to me, Peter is severely wounded and Anthony is dead. Blood spurts all over me. God, down, I say. With my teeth clenched, I close Anthony's eyes and Peter cries out in pain. I pull him down so that the stretcher bearers can take him, and I climb back up on the crest. The Germans are a few dozen meters away, too many of them. We're given orders to fall back. It makes me furious. I take several shots, then I hurtle down the bank to the bottom of the trench. Peter is dead. Oh wait. The sky is dark. Yes, a strange darkness. Cold. And then suddenly there are points of light, or maybe sun. I can't say. Everything is moving. It's like a fireworks display. It's magnificent. I murmur, "Hey, boys, did you see that?" I hear the cavalry. What are you doing? Well done. The boys, man, not making any sense. I'm delirious. Must be the injuries. There isn't any cavalry. No cavalry in sight. See, just St. George, all these arches in the heavens, such light, such power. Everything is white.
That's the Angels, love.
Okay, so hopefully that'll give. I thought I'd just try that out just to see if that, from seeing it visually, it might just give you a different impression. So what then happens on the 29th of September, Arthur Machen published his ghost story, and it actually went into the London Evening News. The book followed the following year. Now, where Arthur Machen's story differs, it really is, the crux of it is it's a story about a first rearguard action based on the retreat from Mons, and during the fighting, a British soldier suddenly remembers dinner plates used at a London restaurant that were decorated with the figure of St. George, and the motto, "May St. George be a present help to the English." The soldier then sees a long line of shapes that resemble archers. The bowmen then let fly a cloud of arrows at the advancing Germans, who fall dead in their thousands. This is the story that is suggested is the cause of the legend. So which differs somewhat to what the soldiers were saying. Now, the good versus evil was seized on British government straight away. They really like the idea of the Angels of Mons, because they've been telling the country in August, off we go to France, give the Germans a bit of a kick in, and everyone will be back home by Christmas. The start realization is locked in now that they're there for the long term. The church themselves don't help matters. They were seen depleting less congregations for the last 50, 60 years. And they like the idea of come to church on a Sunday because it's good versus evil. You're on, come to church and pray for your loved one. And it encourages this sort of behavior, priests blessing weapons, which should be fully ashamed of themselves. And then we come to I know this is a new piece of evidence I've got for you tonight. Now, David Ludlow, a couple of weeks ago, was the only guy that I knew of that was still alive that had actually spoken to one of the original witnesses, and it was his grandfather, Private William Ludlow. And he had quite a story to tell. So I'll read this back to you. It was Christmas time when I was talking to him about it. When I was asking what the angels had been like, he pointed to a card on the mantelpiece with a picture of an angel with wings outspread and said it was just like that. It's quite emotional, really, talking about it, because I remember it as if it was yesterday. But it was decades ago that David Ludlow spoke to his granddad, William Ludlow, Bill, as he was known, who slipped up in London in 1914 to join up underage at 17 and fight a German nation on the march. Only 3 weeks or so after Britain went to war, the private of the Royal Fusiliers, City of London Regiment, found himself embroiled in the Battle of Mons in Belgium. According to the Western Front Association, which is generally, it's just, for people interested in the First World War history, the first action, according to them, was the 23rd of August, when the German army attacked and suffered what was at the time enormous infantry casualties from the terrific rate of rapid rifle fire of the British professional troops. The British volleys brought the Germans to a stall, said the Western Front Association. The trouble was the enemy ranks were being swelled. The British commander decided to withdraw his outnumbered men, and the ferocity of the battle on the 23rd and the apparent stunning British victory over a superior force immediately engendered a rumour that swept the British homeland. Some form of divine intervention must have occurred. The rumour typically claimed that an avenging angel, clothed in all in white, mounted on a classical white horse and brandishing a flaming sword, had appeared in a parting of the clouds at the worst moments of the night battle. The angel had rallied the troops and enabled them to crush the enemy and halt their advance. This apparition was soon called the Angel of Mons, though by whom remains obscure. It was also seen as a divine indication that God was on the side of the Allies and in the end would prevail over their essential powers. Now, clearly the Western Front accounts skeptical. They call it a mass illusion, and they're always pointing out that the British troops were all soldiers well versed in legends such as the shower of arrows that saved the grossly outnumbered British Asian Corps. The Bowman story that Arthur Machen wrote, I still say, is a recycled version of the Asian Corps story, because they've been there with this before. And indeed, some of the accounts of the soldiers, some did claim of a protective shield of Bowman around the British at Mons. Whatever the truth, the Angels of Mons story obviously reached Wood families. All they're seeing every morning is catastrophic casualty lists. So I reading about eyewitness accounts of angel-like figures with outspread wings, the legend therefore got created from there. Now, Bill Ludlow, however, wasn't really an old soldier. He was a young guy, really, and he was utterly convinced that he saw the sky full of angels. So we'll go back to what his grandson had to say. Bill saw some bad things as the war continued. It seems he fought at Ypres, which is Belgium, and on the Somme, which is France. By good fortune, he survived, returned to his native Kent and became a labourer in the cement industry. But life didn't treat him that kindly. He was widowed when claimed his wife after their son was born. Bill raised the lad, and then once the boy had grown and married, lived with the couple. Tuberculosis, got it right in the end. David, the next generation, thus grew up with Bill as an integral part of the family, and because of that, he was very close to him. He had his own room in our house. I used to go up and see him every night, sit with him. Grandfather didn't talk about his time as a soldier unless he was asked, though. He told me he had seen terrible things no one should see again. One day when he was about 11 or 12, I was doing a project at school about the Battle of Mons, and I asked him about it. You were there, weren't you? He was answering in a sort of yes or no terms. Then when I said about the angels, he went into quite a bit of detail. My grandfather said he saw this angel 20 feet tall, outspread wings, hands behind her, holding back the lines. He could see her plainly. Beautiful, he said. So what does David Ludlow think now about his grandfather? I researched this, and there's an awful lot of skepticism about it. People say it could be men hallucinating, it could be a cloud formation, or it could be a phenomenon of the weather. It could be this, it could be that. At the end of the day, my grandfather wasn't a religious man in any way, shape, or form. He had no reason to lie to me. He only told me what he saw. I won't say what he thought he saw, because he was convinced what he saw was there. He told me with great conviction that he had seen the sky full of angels at Mons. They had their wings outstretched above them. He had no reason to make this up, and he remained as certain of this right up to the death of silicosis, a lung condition due to his work. So are you convinced? Yes, because knowing the man, knowing he was a simple, very honest man, a simple man, not simple as Diwali, but he was a simple, straightforward man. There's never smoke without fire, really, is there? It's all very well, people, to say that he could have been men hallucinating, but couldn't all have been hallucinating at the same time? And the stories continue. Our nurse, Phyllis Campbell, who had just returned from France and Belgium, where she'd been treated wounded soldiers, she reported that many of the men she cared for swore that they had witnessed an angel or angels hovering over the battlefield at Mons. They variously said that it was either angelic hosts or ranks of archers who meticulously put the enemy to flight. In fact, she said some of the German dead had suffered arrowed wounds. That one does need a little bit of care with that one. I'm not sure you could tell the difference between an arrow wound and a bayonet. And then we come an interesting statement from a sergeant with the Cheshire Regiment. And this was actually a witness statement taken at his court martial. And this is what he had to say, or part of what he had to say. We were pinned down in a shell hole, unable to move forwards, machine guns, or backwards artillery. My lance corporal asked what I would be doing in the afterlife. We all had a good laugh. We had all accepted this was the end. Suddenly a private shouted, "Who is that?" It was pitch black, black as coal, but I could just make out a glowing figure of a woman onto the edge and to the right of the large shallow we were positioned in. "Get in, you daft mare, you'll be killed," I shouted. She smiled and simply pointed to my left, waving her hand as she did so. She spoke not a word. "Must be French," she said. But somehow her comforting smile made us feel at ease, and I have no idea why. I ordered the men out of the shoal, and we quickly fast-trotted left in the direction she pointed. Seeing ahead was difficult. It was pitch black, but each time I looked to our right flank, the woman was there, with her finger always pointing. After 10 or 15 minutes, she nodded her head in agreement, and we then realized we were next to a wooded copse with sheltering trees. I looked back again to thank her and make sure she was safe, but all I could see was blackness again. She had vanished. There we waited until daybreak, and then we made our way back to HQ. That is why we were late in returning, sir. Everything I've told this court is true, and every one of the men will tell you the same story. So whether Arthur Machen's story was invention, and I think it was just a general ghost story. It was certainly stated that a curious phenomena had been witnessed by countless officers and men in connection with the retreat from Mons. Sometimes it took the form of a strange cloud indisposed between the Germans and the British. Both British and German commanders thought at first that the sheet of fog mist was a weapon, which is correct. When you look at the statements between British and the Germans, what the British said they saw was a sheet or curtain wall of mist or fog coming from the left, not rising or falling like you would expect with mist or fog. Germans said the same, but the sheet of fog or mist came from right to left, corroborating what each one was saying. And because it was already rumoured that both sides, both British and Germans, were using chemical weapons, and indeed they did have mustard gas and chlorine, not used at Mons, it would be used later on in the war. I can understand there why they were concerned over this mist being possibly could well be a weapon. Then others, of course, reported being guided to safety by angels. So the stories get more and more remarkable as you go. In 1915, the SPR published a report on the Angel of Mons, and basically this is what Mark Valentine had to say. It concluded that many of the stories of visions of the battlefield were founded on mere rumour. No first-hand testimony was obtainable, and detailed evidence was lacking. Even if we conclude that some soldiers in extreme conditions may have thought they saw extraordinary things on the battlefield, and had evidence of even that is distinctly lacking, yet no one can deny it was Arthur Machen's story that gave resonance and power to an image and assurance that many people in Britain wanted to believe in. I'm not sure where you could get the detailed evidence from, because in 1914, they didn't walk around with Polaroids back then. So it's all going to come down to personal statements or personal experiences, really. So between August and December 1914, the British government loved the idea of the Angel of Mons. January 1915, they do a complete 180 and suppress the story and deny it. So something must have happened, because governments don't just suddenly U-turn without good reason. And I think I found the cause. And it goes back to the 25th of December 1914, Christmas Day, or there or thereabouts, Christmas Day in 1914, when troops, both German and British, in a way, spontaneously and on their own call, brought about their own ceasefire, which was unheard of. And if you think about that for a moment, what would happen at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning in a modern day context if the Ukrainian and Russian forces decided, sod there, throw the weapons on the floor and go home? That's a scenario which occurred on the what became known as the Christmas Truce in 1914. They generally accepted that how that occurred, both sides of the trenches, German and British, were singing carols, trying to outplay each other. Eventually somebody pokes a rifle with a bayonet at the end with a white handkerchief tied on it, which is really a parley, really. It's not a surrender, but a parley, which is, I'm not going to do you any harm, don't do me any harm. They both exchanged, and eventually both German and British got out of the trenches, went into no man's land, exchanged gifts, shook hands, greetings, played cards, and had the famous game of football. They probably had a wonderful time Christmas Day, but the British government, the high-ranking military, were not impressed. Military relies on total and absolute discipline, and they're not going to accept them unilaterally bringing about their own ceasefire. If a regimental sergeant major says jump, you don't ask him how high, you just do it. It has to be absolute and total. This is not going to happen again. So before the new year came about, they made sure every troop in the trenches was made aware that if they ever got out the trench again and tried to fraternize with the enemy again, and this is both sides, both German and British, it wasn't just Britain, Germans were the same, that there would be no court martial, no court hearing, it'd be simply shot on the spot. It's one of the main reasons that a officer in the trenches carries a small arm. Small arms, I know, is about as much use as a catapult with in a land battle. They're there to keep your own in check, and which is exactly what occurred. What you then see is a clamping down and discipline. The top right picture, one that disturbs us all, with the woeful execution of soldiers. In 1914, 4 soldiers were executed for cowardice or desertion. 1915, 45, 1916, 88, and 1917 by the same number. So it was almost getting to the point of like 2 every 10 days. Bottom left is an image of a letter that was sent home. Massive sanitization of letters. It was occurring anyway. What generally happened, you gave your letter to your commanding officer, he would read it. If he saw anything he was not happy with, he'd give you the letter back, you go and rewrite it. What then happens in the January, they then to sanitize it, basically just inking it through anything they weren't happy about. And then in the March of 1915, a strange event occurs called the Crucified Soldier. Now, this was an interesting one because no one knows where this started, but I've got a good idea. And the rumor was that a Canadian soldier was found bayoneted in the shape of a crucifixion on the side of a barn. No eyewitnesses ever come forward to say they saw this occur or even found the body. All it seems to have been was a rumor. Now, it's interesting it was a Canadian soldier because at this point in 1915, the Commonwealth countries were not over happy with what was occurring in the First World War. If you're in Australia, what on earth is a war on the other side of the world got to do with Australia? And they have a point. So choosing a crucified soldier with German bayonets, being Canadian, is about as much motivation you need for a soldier, as well as the country. And it certainly did turn a lot of the anti-war brigade then began to be quieting down. So it's always an interesting one that when it comes down to misinformation as well as propaganda, if it's not a Russian doing it, it's normally British, and they're very good at it. They've run campaigns after campaigns, stretching back to Napoleonic, of getting the enemy as well as your men to believe certain aspects of it. So I think that's the reason why the British government changed stance. And then we come to the story of Robert Cleaver. Now, the reason why I wanted to include this is that we're all investigators at the end of the day, and we're always looking into cases. Some of them are historical ones. And people often say to me, why are you looking at something that happened about 50, 60 years ago? It's because I've always said that the Fox Mulder is correct. The truth is out there if you look hard enough. So I've picked this one up because this is a perfect example why you should never trust any evidence, wherever it comes from, and irrespective of how historical it is. And this is Private Robert Cleaver of the Cheshire Regiment. Now, Robert Cleaver was so adamant and convinced of what he saw in Mons that he wrote to one of the newspapers. The newspaper printed the story because the media were after good side of the war, and they printed it. People then took, as they will do, mickey out of him. He was so angry and adamant of what he saw that he goes to court and signed an affidavit. And exactly word for word, this is what he had to say. I, Robert Cleaver, number 10515, a private in the 1st Cheshire Regiment of His Majesty's Army, make oath and say as follows, that I personally was at Mons and saw the vision of the angels with my own eyes. Signed, Robert Cleaver. Spiritualist magazine described it as striking confirmation, and Harold Begbie printed the story as a factual account in his book On the Side of the Angels in 1915. Undoubtedly, there certainly was a Robert Cleaver who had served in the Cheshire Regiment. And this is a perfect example for me because I've got a close association with the Cheshire Regiment. So I was able to get information which is not normally probably available. Hazelhurst, George Hazelhurst is just really a justice of the peace of JP from Flint in North Wales. I don't understand why he takes this one on board. Is he acting on his own initiative, or is he acting on for some other? I'm not suggesting a conspiracy theory here. It's just an idea that I've got. But he generally decided, I'm not convinced with Cleaver's testimony. And he says that rumours reached him that Cleaver was not even at Mons. By what means, he never said. So Hazelhurst said he wrote to the regimental headquarters of the Cheshire Regiment to check the details. And Major Hicks replied to say that Cleaver had been mobilised in Chester on the 22nd of August 1914. Mons occurred on the 23rd, the day after. So now, let me just read that back to you again. Major Hicks replied that Cleaver had been mobilised in Chester on the 22nd of August 1914. If you read that in a newspaper, you might be right to presume that Robert Cleaver was in Chester, enlisted and mobilised from Chester. And it would be natural you would think that. He was then sent to the 1st Battalion with a draft and to France on the 6th of September, and was sent back to Britain on sick leave on the 8th of December 1914. So what I've decided to do then was look George S. Hazelhurst. I can't find an awful lot on this guy. He lived at Birkenhead, seemed to be a justice of the peace, bit of a busybody. Why he decided to take on, the task of suppressing these stories, I have absolutely no idea. But he also went on to say that Private Cleaver could not have been at Mons. He could not have seen the Angels of Mons. There is no need to inquire into the paranormal problem of witness angels interceding directly and visibly in human affairs. Robert Cleaver simply was not physically present. Hazelhurst wrote again to the Daily Mail to reveal his findings. He did not need to spell out Cleaver's infamy. The Battle of Mons was in August 1914, and readers will draw their own conclusions. The information sworn on oath is usually regarded as sufficiently trustworthy for publication, but apparently not in this case. Hazelhurst is calling Cleaver a liar. Hazelhurst made a general appeal for witnesses to the angels because he wants more stories. Well, none of the officers who were at Mons and saw the angels of whom Miss Marable speaks come forward and confess it. No sane person believed this angel yarn. If you want to get information from a soldier about what somebody saw, that is not a good way of going about it. So let me just, how can I minimize this a second? Yeah, okay, I know where I'm up to. There's this bit at the top that was missing that I couldn't see properly because of the top column. This is the article that Hazelhurst writes to the Daily Mail, and that's where I've just transcribed it through. So all the names such as Major Hicks and so on and so forth are in there. So I haven't made a mistake with it. Firstly, I've had 3 archivists from the Cheshire Regiment looking at this for me as well. I already knew the answer. No, we can't find any record of a Major Hicks. He's never served with the Cheshire Regiment ever. We then turn our attention to other regiments. No Major Hicks existed in the First World War from any regiment or any service, including Navy and Air Corps. He doesn't exist. So I don't know where Hazelhurst got his information from. The top left is the medal card that Hazelhurst refers to with the number 10515. This is just a medal card. It's a record of what medals you're entitled to. If you've got an ancestor that served in the First World War, say he joined up in 1916 to 1918, he's going to get a minimum of 2 medals, the Victory Medal and the British Medal. If you're there at the beginning, you'll get 1 or 2 medals. In the case of Robert Cleaver, he got the 14th star. Okay, I'll come back to that in a second. So now go back to what Hazelhurst said, that Cleaver was mobilised in Chester on the 22nd of August, the day before Mons, so therefore it's impossible, couldn't have been there. That suggested that he just enlisted. Robert Cleaver goes back a long, long way. In 1911, his termination of his first level of engagement had come to an end. He actually joined up in 1905. He was already in serving 9 years when the First World War broke out. He then signed up again for another further 6 years in 1911. Now, Robert Cleaver, this is the last document, I have got all his documents. Anyone's interested in this, and you want them, just drop me a line and you're welcome to them all. There's about 70, 80 pages of it. On this one, this is dated the 22nd of January, 1922. This is Robert Cleaver. He's with the 1st Cheshire Regiment, 1st Battalion of the Cheshire Regiment, 10515. He's then transferred to the Manchester Regiment with a different regimental or colour number. That's quite common. So over the one before it, Thomas Reagan, you can see that he first joined the Manchester Regiment, regiment number 495. Then he was first to 1st Gunnery Battalion, King's Light, under a different regimental number, again with the Labour Corps, different regimental number, 1st Manchester Regiment, different regimental number. So in the First World War, you could serve and have multiple numbers. My grandfather was the same. He had he joined up with the Cheshire Regiment initially, had 1 regimental number, then transferred to the Machine Gun Corps and had a separate regimental number. So the only way I can make any sense out of this lot is put in some sort of table form for you. So I've got all his service records, and there is only one Robert Cleaver within the Cheshire Regiment. He first signed up in the 15th of March 05, initially with the 3rd Battalion. He then transferred to the 4th Battalion, then to the 1st Battalion. All his regimental numbers follow suit. He's the same Robert Cleaver. He lived at Macclesfield. The same Robert Cleaver, the same date of birth. Same Robert Cleaver with the same wife, Clara. I know the only one, Robert Cleaver, had a daughter, Ivy, born in 1907. Completed all his training. Excellent conduct. And he was also promoted twice, private, corporal, sergeant. By weird coincidence, he's back as a private. I don't know why that happens. I can't find any disciplinary marker against him. And I'm not sure why that happened, because once the First World War broke up, they're suddenly faced with millions of extra troops and they need officers to deal with them. So I'm not sure. But the clue comes to the medal card itself, which he received 3 medals, the 14 star, the British medal, as well as the Victory Medal. Now, being mobilised in Chester on the 22nd of August doesn't mean to say he was even at Chester. I've quadruple checked this one, and I am right with it. If he's already serving, even as a reserve, there's absolutely no reason for him to be in Chester. My cousin got mobilised for Bosnia in Spain on holiday. So he can get mobilised wherever. There's absolutely no reason for him to be in Chester or Shrewsbury, for that matter. So the big clue comes on the 14 star. It's also known as the Mons star. The second star is called the Bronze star. So what you generally had is that if you were there at the outset of the 23rd, on that first expeditionary force on the 23rd of August 1914, you will get the 14 star. If you then joined in, say, September 1914, you would get the Bronze star. Robert Cleaver got the 14 star, and which is indicated on his medal card. So it's more likely than not, Robert Cleaver was at Mons. And it's for reasons unknown, the Justice of the Peace, George Hazelhurst, was either given the wrong information by elusive Major Hicks, and we can't find any record who on earth he was, doesn't seem to exist, or he gave deliberately changed it, or a bit of both. And what is also striking, in all the records I've got of Robert Cleaver, there's no mention of the dates in there, and particularly no mention of a sickness record on the war documents. So I think I've indicated Robert Cleaver. I'd be interested to know your thoughts at the end of it. But Hazelhurst, I don't know what on earth he was doing, why he decided to take Cleaver to task. That may also explain the reason why he got demoted. However, many of the public were still ready to believe that the angelic hosts had prevented the German breakthrough. Miracles happen in Judea, why not in Flanders? And everyone knew occultist clergymen, they weren't a good thing. But soldiers continued to report something unusual. A Lance Corporal with 15 years service said he stood watching the vision for 3/4 of an hour. We came over quiet and still. It took us that way. One of his mates cried, "God's with us," and that kind of loosened us. Their captain, when they fell into march, said, "Well, men, we can cheer up now. We've got someone with us." The Lance Corporal added, "I should be very sorry to make a fool of myself by telling a story merely to please anyone." Then the press discovered a lieutenant colonel who said that after Lakatu, the column was accompanied by squadron upon squadron of ghostly horsemen. All Saints magazine in Clifton reported that 2 officers were serving at Mons told Sarah Marable about what they saw on the front line. Both of whom themselves had seen the Angels save their left wing from the Germans when they came right upon them during the retreat from Mons. One of Miss Marable's friends, who was not a religious man, told her that he saw a troop of angels between us and the enemy. He has been a changed man ever since. The other man and his company were retreating. They heard the German cavalry tearing after them. They therefore turned around and faced the enemy, expecting nothing more but instant death. When to their wonder, they saw between them and the enemy a whole troop of angels. The German horses turned around terrified and regularly stampeded. The men tugged at their bridles while the poor beast tore away in every direction. Now, this guy is an interesting one. About 2-3 weeks ago, I'm arranging a dedication event at the National Arboretum in Staffordshire, and I needed the Reverend, who's the old Padre of the Cheshire Regiment, to come and do a service for us. And I mentioned that I was doing this webinar on the Angels of Mons with ASAP. And he said, oh, I've got a story to tell about my grandfather. So he sent me this quick story, and I'll quickly read back what he had to say. My grandfather told me a similar tale of how the nation had prayed during the dark hour of World War I. Next day, a superior German forces surrendered to the surprised Tommies. We thought we'd defeat you, the German prisoner of war confided, until came your white cavalry, looking like invincible angels. Have you read 2 Kings chapter 6? My grandfather said. We had no white cavalry. Saved by the Angels of Mons, a miracle God. 3 soldiers were interviewed separately by the vicar of a church near Cheshire in the north of England. All agreed that a miracle had saved them from a massive German force about to overrun their unit. As the hard-pressed British troops prepared to fight to the end, the Germans suddenly recoiled. German prisoners explained that the attack was aborted because they saw strong reinforcements coming up. In fact, the ground behind the British was empty. The men interviewed had no doubt who authored their salvation. It was God that did it, they said. Once Lars Corporal told his nurse of the appearance of angels during the Mons retreat. He could see, he said, quite plainly in mid-air, a strange light which seemed to be quite distinctively outlined and was not a reflection of the moon, nor were there any clouds. The light became brighter and I could see distinctly 3 shapes, one in the centre having what looked like housebed wings. The other 2 were not so large, but were quite plainly distinct from the centre one. Quite a descriptive account. They were above the German line facing us. We stood watching them for about 3/4 of an hour. All the men with me saw them. I have a record of 15 years good service. Another tale of a Coldstream Guards unit lost in the gloom of the early morning. One man saw a glow in the darkness, a glow that became the figure of a female angel dressed in white with a gold band around their hair. Gesturing to the tired guardsmen, she led them through the night to a sunken road, a way out of danger that Coldstream patrols had not been able to find and afterwards could not find again on any map. An English woman nursing in France wrote to the wounded Lancashire Fusilier who asked her for a religious medal. Was he Catholic, she asked. No, he said, I was a Methodist. But he had seen St. George mounted on a white horse leading the British into action against overwhelming odds. The next minute, he said, comes this funny cloud of light, and when it clears up, there's a tall man with a yellow hair and golden armour on a white horse, holding his sword up, and his mouth open as if he was saying, come on, boys, I'll put a kibosh on the devils. Then before you could say knife, the Germans had turned, and we were after them, fighting like 90. There's no doubt, I think, that the men that survived the clash on the 23rd would have been battle weary and maybe to the point of exhaustion. It was an incredibly hot day, and the smoke and the heat could have mutated in all sorts of weird patterns. Buildings were set alight. They may have seen something hallucinated. And it's, I think it is entirely possible that some did, mistaking the shapes in the sky some form of supernatural origin. And many will say it's probably the logical explanation for the Angel of Mons phenomena. But the more I looked into this, it seems to really defy any satisfactory rational explanation. And I don't think we should rule out anything. It doesn't matter who we are. And sometimes with incredible stories like this, it's very difficult to keep your mind open. And many have pointed out, I know Karen Kendrick mentioned this to me earlier, that the single definitive description of the angelic apparition said to predate the publication of the Bowman is a postcard written by British Brigadier General John Charteris, dated the September the 5th, 1914. He was the main intelligence officer. More than 3 weeks before the story was published, the text mentions strange happenings at Mons. And it's generally believed that the Angel of Mons story probably came from Matron's story. Those that haven't got a sufficient grounding will generally say that. And Ernest Turner pointed out in his book Old Blighty, it's never been explained how Arthur Machen's long line of shapes with a shining about them suddenly became a shining beings and then a company of angels. And what's important, I think, soldiers of all ranks and nations, British, Belgium, German, French, all were reporting exactly the same supernatural events weeks before Arthur Machen had even thought about his story of the Bowman. So questions do certainly remain. And I think when you look into any historical case or history, you're always going to find inconsistencies. It goes with it. Skeptics will quickly rubbish some claims as false, therefore labelling the old story as nothing more than a myth. And in the case of Angels of Mons, by propaganda, sleep deprivation, exhaustion, mass hallucination, if one part of the story is false, you speak to any skeptic over the Enfield haunting, they will quickly point out that Margaret and Janet Hodgson falsified evidence. They did, but not all of it. So maybe we should sometimes use the same sort of practice. If I can prove one story to be correct, why not all of it? So, end of the day, maybe it was, after all, merely mass hysteria, but maybe it wasn't. Just because the story sounds just so unbelievable doesn't mean to say that it is.